Okay, so first of all, a warm welcome to the Doctoral Hub, which is an online mentoring community that provides relevant advice to doctoral students on what to do next and how to do it quickly. And our webinar today is about identifying research gaps, and it comes in the format of a roundtable discussion. And we hope that at the end of the webinar, you will have a better understanding about what constitutes a research gap, to gain some insights on how the understanding of the research gap is evolving as your research progresses, and to learn about how to articulate the research gap to others. So with this, a warm welcome to our panelists today. So my name is Dr. Andreas Meissner. I'm running the Doctorate Hub together with a small team of like-minded, like Professor Dr. Nick Eschel and Professor Dr. Bostian Gomischtek, who briefly can introduce themselves. Nick, might I play the ball to you?
Pleasure. Thank you so much for the introduction. My name is Nick Eschel. I'm a professor of marketing in the School of Marketing International Business at Victoria University of Wellington, which is New Zealand's capital city. It's just after 1 a.m. on a Sunday morning. I've been here in this role for just under 2 years. Prior to that, I was a professor of marketing, and I held a chair position in luxury brand management at the American University of Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates. Passionate about academic research. Love writing, love crafting, love looking for research gaps with regard to my own research. And as an aside, I'm a passionate ultra marathon runner as well.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you very much for making yourself available at 1 a.m. in the morning.
My pleasure.
Bastian, please.
I don't know. Many of you who are here today have already met me. Actually, I'm too often, I would say, with Doctoral Hub and taking actually, some webinars and other activities with you. But generally, regarding the introduction, I'm professor of quality management. I've been working actually for many years in Europe. Then I moved in 2014 to the UAE, to Dubai. First, I was with University of Wollongong in Dubai, and for the last 2 years, I've been with Hamdan bin Mohammed Smart University. Why I did actually let's say, accepted this invitation, this challenging invitation, to discuss today about research gaps is exactly what Prof. Nick said. Actually, we are always enjoying to find them. We're always actually thrilled actually to support, help, discuss about our research, as well as actually research our PhD students are doing. And I usually say, after the research gap has been found, what would you say, Nick? Probably 50% is almost done for us. For us, that means for the supervisors, not for the students, that's something else. But for us, so much has been actually, in our eyes, accomplished. So it is really a crucial part of a PhD voyage, actually. Yep, with that, actually, back to you, Andreas. And,
all right, and I will soon stop the presentation. Let's come to the roundtable format. We prepared a couple of questions that we will go through, but you are very much welcome to also ask any questions that you might have through the webinar. As said, you can use the chat function or come in orally and participate in the discussion. Both is fine. And with this, let's come to the first question, and let's place that question to Nick. What constitutes a research gap? Is it a gap in the literature, a knowledge gap, or something else?
Yeah, that's a really great question to start this roundtable discussion. And certainly from my experiences over the last 30 years in academia, it's a question that the majority of doctoral students struggle with, and can struggle with, for some time. Often there is a desire to get straight into building models and testing models, and looking at things from a statistical perspective and writing
and
up those
collecting the
results.
data.
And collecting the data, absolutely, as Bastian says, but there's a more fundamental question that has to be raised and addressed at the very beginning, and that is theoretical contribution with all PhD study. And in getting a handle on theoretical contribution, at the heart of that is identifying research gaps that, in my view, have to lend themselves to empirical investigation, because they are important to study. I think as PhD students, when we read a lot of articles and we try and make sense of existing literature, we can identify gap after gap after gap, and I'll define it in a minute in some words. But then we define those gaps. We have this bigger question of, so what? So many gaps that may surface from reading literature can often be very insignificant. In other words, they don't carry a lot of importance. So what I'm getting at here is that when, as doctoral students, we identify research gaps, it's important that there is a strong motivation to actually plug those gaps. So come back to the original question, what is a research gap? In my view, a research gap or gaps represents an unanswered research question. So that's how I would define a research gap, an unanswered research question. But there has to be a motivation to plug that research gap. It must be important to study. So when I say important to study from a theoretical perspective, it solves a problem. And of course, it may be managerial relevant to study as well.
Thank you very much, Nick. Bastian, something to add from your end to this?
I don't know. I mean, your question was a little bit challenging and provoking, I would say. You said, is it a gap in knowledge, or is it a gap in the literature? That's how I understood it. I mean, for me, I would say everything what is gap in the literature would be, for me, in a way, a gap in knowledge as well, because the majority of the important things we are trying to share with the others. So whenever we have answered a good research question, or a research question, and supported it actually with the data, then we are trying actually to publish that. So from my perspective, and today I will be, as you know, I mean, that's why I said it's a challenging topic. I'll go on that side, and I will kind of try to bring the research gap to life based on literature. If we are talking about the PhDs, if we can start talking about the DBAs, where we go actually and use your definitions, like what's not working, what has to be fixed, that's something else. But in case we are talking about the PhDs, I would really kind of link literature and knowledge together. And I would say that the things that haven't been published yet could be considered, from my perspective, as a knowledge gap. Maybe there was another thing what Nick said. He said that a research gap is what a research question hasn't answered yet. Did I understand you correctly? So I do not totally agree with you. From my point of view, I would say, and I push my students in the direction that I say, first, you have to find the research gap. Based on the research gap, and that goes in the direction what Prof. Nick said, it has to be relevant. It has to be, I mean, we have to answer so what question. Based on the research gap, we will formulate the research question. So that's how I see it. So for me, a gap is really a gap. It's not there. We have to fill it. And based on that, how we will fill it, we have to think what type of research question or what research question we will kind of create, develop, and then the things will be actually kind of probably quite smoothly running. Because after we have the research question, then we have the conceptual framework, theoretical framework, doesn't matter, then actually methodology is there, and things are kind of, you know, quite clear, I would say, for the students. That does not mean that the work is not still actually challenging, and a lot of it. But these two things are really guiding, are really focusing the research study, or if you want to your dissertation, or if you want your success, whatever you take it. For me, the research gap, and based on the research gap, then the formulated research question are the most important parts before you start really working on your research. Did I say something wrong, Nick?
Now you've articulated it, as always, Bastian, beautifully. I've come across over the last 5-6 years a wonderful source that takes both PhD and DBA students through this very challenging process. And it's a piece of work by several individuals, but the lead author is Wayne Booth, B-O-O-T-H. And him and his academic colleagues have written a book which is very, very practical to read, and recommend it for any PhD student. It's called The Craft of Research. And what this book does through some excellent writing, it takes the PhD student through the process that Bastian has actually just summarized, and how a PhD student should move from a broad subject to a more focused topic, moving into the identification of research gaps, and how to formulate research questions, and then getting a handle on the motivation for the study. In other words, why is filling or addressing this research gap important to study? So if you haven't come across it, I would highly recommend that you take a look at it. The Craft of Research by Wayne Booth. But totally agree with you, Bastian.
Okay, so the next, probably what we should talk about is how to find the research gap. That's another question, which is kind of probably, yeah, following our discussion right now. How to find a research question. Does any of you students have actually an idea, or whoever has joined us? How have you tried to find, or how have you found actually your research gap?
Question to the audience. Is there anyone who wants to share experience on how you managed to find the research gap? No? Bastian, so how do you find a research gap? And how do you make sure you don't lose it again?
I tell my students they should find it. That's easy for me.
Yeah, hello.
No, seriously.
Andrew.
Hello.
Yes, please, Andrew, come forward.
Yes. I think good morning, everyone. Yeah.
Good morning.
Yeah, morning. I think this is one areas where I have been having a lot of challenges in recent time, and I'm sure probably every other student will be having that issue. Just like I've been discussing with Dr. Andres about my topic of research. You know, it's coming from a practical business environment from my former employer. I happen to understand that some of these customers are actually not really having a feel of what it is to adopt digital technology in their business. So I took it upon myself to do a research on that particular area, and knowing full well that most of them have this knowledge gap about this particular topic. So I don't know if that seeing that particular knowledge gap area in the field of this business context is actually a gap. Or if the lack of empirical study, like we always see in most of all the articles I've actually read, 95% of them had talked about lack of empirical study, lack of research in this particular field as a research gap. And it's been causing some kind of argument that in most cases, lack of research is actually not a gap per se. So that is
I love that last part. That's exactly what I would have told my students. Lack of is a very generic claim, right? I preferred the version of Professor Nick, an unanswered question. That's something clear, right?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. In a way, I do agree with that. I mean, if I go back, I can show you actually my lecture on research gaps. It says, should I read it? How do I find one? And I start, make a list of any questions you have imagined. Okay, that's now to provoke you, Andreas.
Okay.
Imagine in a way that you really are passionate about that topic, because that's the most important part anyway. In case you are not passionate about your topic, then you will never finish your PhD. That's the most important part. If you will be kind of, how should I say, mechanically be searching for the areas where you haven't found any research and stuff like that, that does not mean that that is actually your area and you should do it. So the first idea for me is go out there, think what is really your passion in research or in the area you would like to know more. So imagine those areas and then read. We are now on the PhD route, okay? And then read in order to see whether these questions have been answered. But these are not research questions, okay?
Yeah.
Not to confuse that.
Okay.
These are questions you have actually in your mind, in your imagination, or if you want to address in your organization that the things are not running. Then you go out there and you read a lot in order to see whether that has been answered or not.
Okay.
If it has been answered, then cancel actually. From my perspective, if that has been answered in the literature, is not a research gap anymore.
Okay.
But if it hasn't been answered, then you can start thinking of building your research question based on that. And now I'll stop talking, okay? Nick, you want to say something?
No, it's a great discussion, and Andrew, I certainly agree with your last comment. And I'm smiling because when we talk about this word contribution at PhD level, contribution largely means theoretical. That's the number one that supervisors and PhD examiners are actually looking for. In other words, how does your PhD work add to the existing body of knowledge on a particular topic? But sometimes PhDs, we can also make a contribution on a number of other fronts. But I'm not saying they are not important, but what I am saying is they are less important. So, for example, you could make a contribution on methodology. You're utilizing a novel methodological approach to some data collection or some data analysis, whatever that might be. Equally, you could make a contribution on the empirical side, in other words, context.
Okay.
But the key one is theoretical. So it was interesting to hear you describe your broad topic of investigation, i.e. Digital technology adoption. Now, I'm sure, although it's not my particular field, but I'm broadly familiar with some of the general technology adoption models, but I'm sure that digital technology adoption has been studied. But equally, by synthesizing, all of which I'm sure you've worked through or you've completed it or you're about to do that, by synthesizing all of the relevant literature on digital technology adoption, you should be able to start to tease out perhaps some inconsistencies with different research findings. Maybe you've established some mixed results. So that's the process that you would work through. But I agree with your comment. Totally agree with your comment.
So linking it back, Nick, then again to your first statement, unanswered questions in the literature.
Yes. I do agree, but not research questions, okay? In a way, that's what I was not really
so question generally
questions.
speaking.
As I said, I mentioned that kind of imagine the questions around the topic you would like to do research on. That's for me the idea. And once again, I say something just in order to provoke a little bit further. Don't forget, a good research gap makes actually your research publishable. Sure. And that means that through that you will be contributing actually to the knowledge. Yeah. And I mean, not to talk that you will be able to publish. Okay, that's something else. So it is important in any direction, not just that the supervisors and examiners will be happy with you, but yeah, even the editors might be really happy with you and your research gaps.
Yeah. So Andrew put also in a question in the chat, what's the difference then in a gap in a PhD and in a DBA study? Are those gaps differently, or are the gaps the same, just the contributions?
Yeah, I was just trying to find out, since the DBA in most senses is actually maybe management focused, not though part of academic focus, but unlike PhD that is academic focus. So what I was trying to find out is, for the DBA, can we say that the DBA is more focused on maybe looking for adding value to like an improvement opportunity for the business per se, business environment, not academic environment?
If I may, I do agree with you. I mean, we usually say that the DBA should solve something practical, okay, in the organization. Yeah. I do agree with that. However, that means for me, the starting point where you get your, what did I mention before? I said imagine. Yeah, so you do not in a way imagine what you would like to do, but you are going following the Andreas's way, what has to be fixed, what is not working, what can we improve? Perfectly fine in an organization, I agree with that. But the moment you thought you have found the gap, then the reading starts. All the same things actually which are linked to a PhD are actually then there. You have to actually find the research question based on that you have read a lot of literature, because you should not do something what has been already answered. I mean, you know, the issue is that so many organizations have the same issues, but they don't read. And they do the same thing all over again. It has been done probably 10,000 times, but still they think, oh, it has happened for the first time to me, because they don't read. They don't understand that so many have gone actually through the same challenges, but have solved them. And that's even written in reports, is written actually in, could be even books, but usually in some specific journal papers. So go out there and check. Because if you are repeating what has been already done just in another context, that is actually not a contribution. Though I agree that you will be probably solving the issue in your organization, but you will be not now from the theoretical perspective, contribute to the knowledge, because that knowledge already exists or has existed.
Okay, before we go into the next question, Nick, is there anything you would like to add?
Sure. I agree with that. I mean, we have these huge debates in academia. I mean, it's a topic for another conversation, I know, but this debate between theoretical contribution versus managerial relevance. I mean, my own view, even at PhD level, all research should have a managerial output. There should be some strong managerial implications. However, I do agree with Bastian's views that with a DBA, a student will typically, and rightfully so, start with what is managerial relevant, and there's less emphasis placed on theoretical contribution in terms of adding to the body of knowledge.
All right, thank you. Then let's move into the next question. At what point in the doctoral journey is a research gap actually identified? Who wants to take that question first? Bastian or Nick? Bastian, come on.
Sure. I mean, as I said, for me, it is identified the moment you will not find many literature on that, and you will definitely not find an answer to the research gap. That means the gap still exists. That for me, the explanation, a simple one. In a way, a simple one. You are certain, you have to read, you have to find actually, I mean, read focused, okay, that's clear. Based on that, we do have actually our search machines. Based on that, I mean, for that, we do have our keywords and stuff like that. Clear, you should not read everything, but in your area, in your specific area, in case you do not find the answers, which will be used to, how did I say, to cover or to fill your research gap, then formulate your research question. And that is for me actually the end of searching for the research gap. The moment when you are able to formulate a new, let's say, interesting, challenging contribution, full, should I say, actually research question, then you are there. That's how I see it.
Just to add to that, I think this is for many students, this can be a very time-consuming and certainly iterative process in terms of back and forth. Certainly, you have to nail research gaps, which lead into research questions, which lead into theoretical contribution before you can even contemplate thinking about research design and embarking on data collection. That is absolutely critical. And if you find yourself getting into the research design area and even beginning a process of data collection before you can clearly articulate in a few minutes to your supervisors, what are the gaps? Why are they important to address, i.e. fill? What are my research questions? And how am I adding to the existing body of knowledge? If you can't answer that, then don't move ahead with design and data collection. So with my PhD students, I'm continuously asking during our meetings in 2 to 3 minutes, summarize gap or gaps and why they are important to plug, i.e. fill. How do those gaps relate to your research questions, which is a point that Bastian was referring to very strongly a few minutes ago. Why are they important to study? And this brings out motivation. And then that final bit is by asking these research questions, how am I advancing the existing body of knowledge? That's a critical process, and it's iterative. It is not linear.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, definitely agree that these are the discussions. These are the discussions which are so important. And yeah, I don't know how can I stress more the importance of the supervisory teams in this actually phase. Extremely important. I guess the supervisor should be really part of this. all the time, you should go back to your supervisors, talk to them, discuss with them, because finally they are the ones who should give you the green light. Then, you know, after you have formulated the research question, to start with the design. That means methodology and all the other things actually. So that's so important. For me, those three things, as I have mentioned, research gap, research question, and the conceptual or theoretical framework are the most important part from the perspective of a supervisor. Because if you make a mistake here, then you have, in a way, yeah, should I say, misled the student, and in a way, yeah, the student will be, hopefully not, but it has happened, actually paying for your mistakes as well. So that's so important for me, that those things are really actually done in agreement, in discussion, in continuous disagreement, I would say, even as well with the students. Or, I mean, depends on which side you are. That means as a team, as a PhD team, you really have to have actually your supervisors on board, especially in this phase.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions from the audience before we move into the next question? Question over question.
Hello,
There is
everyone.
one in the chat.
Khalid.
Thank
Yes.
you, Professor. Thank you, Professor, for this enlightening ideas about how we can identify a research gap after reading the literature. My question is that should I identify only one gap, and that means one research question, or I may end up identifying different gaps in the literature, and that means I'm going to answer a number of questions, research questions, and not only one question?
So is that only one or more questions? Bastian or Nick?
So that doesn't mean that I have to find one gap and that equals one research question, or many gaps and different research questions.
Go.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm processing it, and my view on that would be, I don't think you can generalize. In my view, it actually depends on the importance and significance of the gap. So you may, it's conceivable that a PhD student may identify one gap that is theoretically extremely important to actually plug, whereas another student may, from synthesizing existing academic literature, identify a series of research gaps, but their importance is less significant. So I think you have to come back to the importance of the gap that you have actually identified. I hope that makes sense.
Definitely. If I can just maybe continue, I would say you can find even, let's go now from the theoretical perspective, few research gaps. And that does not mean that you have to develop few research questions. Maybe the research gaps you have identified are kind of pointing towards one really important research question. Or, as Prof. Nick just said, you can have just one research gap, which is really, should I say, waste, okay, big, extremely huge gap. And based on that gap, you might find 1, 2, let's say 3 research questions. And then actually, because we go with what, with how, even, I mean, we will not start now about mixed methodologies and stuff like that. But if you go with mixed methods, but that happens many times, that you find something, and that is why you will probably even first start to understand what's going on. And because of that, you will probably develop one research question which is linked to qualitative methodology, maybe. And then after you have, let's say, got an understanding about it, then you might go with another 1 or 2, theoretically, saying now, quantitative, or you might even develop another qualitative. So it's never kind of, from the beginning on, you cannot say that. So it's not, how should I say, linked one-to-one or something like that, research gap, research question. Definitely not. I don't see it that way. And yeah, I mean, yeah, okay, I'll stop here.
Okay, we have a question in the chat, which is actually linked to the fourth question. So how do you manage new findings while you're researching a topic? I mean, given the vast amount of literature, how do you assure that what you consider a gap is a real gap? Nick.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Aman, and it really does highlight the importance of continuing with a systematic literature review, continuing to read new articles that have been published in your respective field on a regular and ongoing basis. You know, sometimes as academic researchers, we work through the process of identifying research gaps that are important, and we frame our research questions. We undertake a research design, we go out and collect some data, and then, you know, 6 months down the track, we established from reading the literature that somebody's beaten us to it. Now that can happen, and often does happen in academic research. So your question is really highlighting the importance of maintaining strong academic reading while you work through the PhD journey. That is so important, because sometimes we have to make some deviations, perhaps in our research design, or we need to, you know, build in some additional constructs that we want to measure in our conceptualization. So I'm hoping my feedback sort of helps with that that question.
If I can add something,
please.
I will comfort a little bit the students, because what Nick just said is probably about his research, our research, I would say. That means from the guys who have already finished the PhD, and we do research because it's of interest for us, and we would like finally to publish. And that makes us, let's say, suffer in case somebody has already published something what we were trying to be the first ones. You know, in your research as a PhD DBA student is a little bit different. Usually when the committee do accept, let's say, your topic, give you the green light, then they will not kind of reconsider that and say you have not contributed, because that's kind of not fair anymore. And we do not, I mean, definitely I don't know any university that has done something like that. Okay, so that means you are from that perspective quite on a safe side regarding your completion. I mean, completion. You know, the university will not intervene or interfere or whatsoever and say, no, you have to change the topic. But you might suffer, and even more probably your supervisors, with publishing then these, let's say, research outcomes.
Yeah, it's a good point,
like
Bastian.
That's the idea. So you should not be nervous about that, okay?
Thank you.
I hope that has has entered, but definitely, I mean, the direct influence will be that you have to take into, that you have to actually include that additional new literature into your literature review, as well as definitely in the discussion. So that's kind of the direct, let's say, influence on your work.
Yeah, and also let's tell the audience that happens quite frequently. It's not an exception. At one point in your research, you will just say, damn it, that chat just did the research I'm doing. And you know what that means? It means that you are that mature that you understand your research fully, right?
But on
you do understand there's more research out in there doing exactly what you are doing.
On the other side, I have to tell you that sometimes the supervisors are not sleeping well as well, because the things are maybe not moving too fast, okay? And the publications are lagging behind the PhDs, okay? That not somebody will be actually faster, because PhD is already out, and some guys are smart and fast in copying good ideas. So that makes us suffer as well. That's why, in case you have found really a good, how did we say, a huge research gap, and defined a really interesting research question, then try to publish as well fast after you have completed, or even in between. So that's another thing, but that is once again not influencing your progress towards your completion.
Right. And if you're taking a PhD in the natural sciences, then ask again outside of this webinar what the meaning of the gap is and what the true story behind this. Let's now come to the next question. Why do doctoral students often struggle to establish the research gap? Bastian, this time it's you first. You're muted.
Yeah, because I don't want to answer this question. No, everybody struggles. So I wouldn't say that is actually just the PhD students. Everybody who is doing research struggles actually many times in order to find really important research gaps. I mean, there are some areas where if you are really lucky, you can say nothing has been done, or really actually just few things have been done in this area. So I'm lucky. But that are probably not many. I mean, maybe they are many, but we unfortunately do not know them. No, I would say the students are struggling because, how should I say, they don't really, should I say, go systematically in a way to search for a research gap. As I mentioned before, you should think of and find something what is really actually your passion, and then you have really, unfortunately, but we are talking now about, okay, not DBA, we're talking about PhD. Now you really have to read a lot in order to find those research gaps, and you know, you have your ideas, and while you are reading, these ideas will be probably growing, or hopefully even not, or it doesn't matter, but you will definitely advancing in your thinking. And based on that, you will be able to probably articulate finally the research gap. But don't forget, there's a system behind as well. I mean, I usually say my students, they should use kind of a table where they are actually following each of the papers they have read. And the last column, I mean, as we can go with, I don't know, title, we can go with topic, we can go with the authors, we can go with methodology, sample size, analysis methods, results, contributions. Well, it's up to you how you will do that. The more you will do, the easier you will have actually while you are writing your literature review as well as your discussion. But the most important part, what we are talking today, is that the last column talks about research gaps. So how you find, how you relate to the paper you have read in the perspective of the research gap, or research gaps you have kind of in mind. That's for me extremely important. So try to do that you have the last column where you are trying to find the research gap. Another more, let's say, way simpler method is, but it's not always leading to a really success, is, as you know, I mean, all the papers, all the journal papers have the last section, future research. And that is sometimes helping you as well, that you see, let's say, that the good guys who are writing a lot in your area, and you know them after a while, what they are saying, what hasn't been done. And that might help you as well a little bit to approach to the research gap. But not just that. Once again, don't go out there kind of mechanically read what the others have said, because that will not give you a lot of satisfaction during your PhD research. But that's how I would say. So it's a little bit system behind that as well, that you can then justify and say that is actually the gap now in knowledge as well as in the literature.
All right, we have a question from the audience. So is the process then read, conceptualize, identify? Could that be roughly that direction?
I don't know. I can give you one of my slides where it says read, 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 think, 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 conceptualize, read, 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 rethink, and so on. So yeah, it's not just a straightforward. You, as Nick said before, it's really actually it goes up and down or left and right. I don't know how we want to say that. Just your motivation should stay high. Okay. That's it. So definitely it is not just one straightforward, let's say, process of steps where you finally conceptualize, but it will be probably more times up and down, if we say so, or kind of feedback, and then once again you rethink and you do that. So I've said many times, what I kind of suggest my students is that they are building their kind of theoretical conceptual framework based on that what they are just now reading, and that helps them in understanding the topic as well, because you read and say, okay, that has been actually included, has been in a way answered as well, but this part probably not. Maybe here is a little bit more value. Let us go into that a little bit more, and so you can actually slowly build up your final direction. I don't know, maybe I'm sometimes too confusing what I'm answering. I'm sorry for that. Just go and ask.
That's okay. No, we do.
Sorry, Andrew, sorry.
We do have a further question from the audience.
No, Nick, let us Nick say what.
Okay, Nick.
Because that was important question. That was a really important question from them. Nick. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly like the process that Prof. Bostian has just described. But based on my own experiences with PhD students to date, is I like Bostian's words: read, read, and read. But as a general observation, it can take quite a bit of time for PhD students to become what I would call critical readers. We read academic, particularly academic journal articles, and we make the assumption early on in our PhD studies that this is a perfect piece of research. Well, that concept of a perfect piece of research doesn't exist. So all academic research has flaws. When I say flaws, I mean areas where improvements can be made. So being a critical reader of academic literature, I think, is really, really important. So, when you're comparing studies, empirical studies, for example, are they coming to the same conclusions, or are there mixed findings? Maybe there are mixed findings because they're using different research methodologies. Maybe the theoretical frameworks that are being used by different academics are different, and they're coming to different conclusions. So being a critical reader of literature, I think, is absolutely paramount in being able to articulate those research gaps clearly, and therefore those research questions, and therefore your theoretical contribution.
Exactly. I'll just say one sentence. That's why my students hate me in the beginning, because I usually say, but you have heard that, majority of you have probably the ones who have been, I am repeating that all the time in order to, how should I say, keep you on track and not demotivate you. I usually say 9 months, the first 9 months is just reading. I don't want to hear nothing else but discussions about the journal papers you have read. You can always come, discuss any of them, but nothing else. Don't try to, I don't know, complete something or say that's it or whatsoever. 9 months is just reading and discussions. And after you have done that, you show should I say, the list of the papers you have read. Based on that, we say, okay, you are closer to that you understand what's going on in your research area. Now we can start, in a way, a little bit more clearly conceptualizing and starting to think what might be done. So it is really important that you understand what's going on in the area. As I said, that pays off while you are writing your literature review, and especially when you are writing your discussion, not to talk, how useful that is actually for your viva, because then you are there.
Okay.
And you can answer any single question.
We do have another question from the chat. Can you identify gaps from the sections that deal with future research? Is that a suitable approach?
Yes, it's one approach.
It's
Yeah,
one possibility.
I said before, I was talking about that before, one
Okay.
of them, or I would say, yeah, it should be, I would say one of them, it should be in parallel as well, you know? So you are taking that into consideration as well.
All
Definitely.
right.
Yeah,
But-
I'm sorry, can I say something?
Yes, please, Andrew.
Yeah, I asked the question, why? Because I read an article and the author actually adopted a theoretical, a particular theory. And on that theory, the author actually identified two particular characteristics that are not included on the characteristic of that theory and developed some two variables, two constructs. So at the end of it, on the future research, he was advising that future researchers should consider management and one other construct as some of those factors to be considered in the adoption of digital technology in the business. So that is why I asked the question that with this statement from that particular article, can one see that particular statement as a gap to be researched on
Yeah.
how management and the other construct that was mentioned in that research period?
Yeah, definitely. But what you have to understand is actually that we write future research based on our knowledge, based on our understanding, and based on our whatever you want to. It's us who write what we think is missing.
Yes.
But you have your different view. You have developed through reading actually a different perspective approach. And that's why you think a little bit in a different way. And that is why it's useful that you can take that on board and then.
Okay.
Of course, Vostin has raised a very, very important point here. You may come to that future research direction section in that academic article, but your own critical review of existing literature, you may come to a different conclusion. So again, don't always take the views of others as gospel. Just critically review the literature, and you may come to a different conclusion, or you may find out from reading that future research section at the end of the article that what an academic is highlighting may not be, in your view, having read existing literature, important to study.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or another paper has already actually dealt with that, but at that time not, and things like that. So.
Okay. Further questions to that area before we come into the final question? Once you establish the research gap, what's next? Nick.
I'm smiling because I've got a couple of PhD students that have very recently nailed research gaps, questions, motivation, and theoretical contribution, and they get into that headspace of taking a well-earned rest, as opposed to then moving into obviously the next stage of developing a rigorous and well justified research design, which will be at the forefront of collecting data to test your conceptualization, your propositions, or your hypothesis, depending on what that looks like. So the next logical stage is the research design, and you need to spend a lot of time in that area. Otherwise, you run the huge risk of collecting data that is not valid and is not reliable and does not answer the research questions that you've identified. So that's the next step, in my view.
Yeah. But you have mentioned now research question. So in my, let's say, process map, the next stage is defining your research question, which has to be, once again, justified. Okay, don't have your 1 or 2 or whatsoever it is, actually research gaps, which are kind of perfectly fine and you are happy with them. The next stage is to write actually a research question, which has to be, once again, justified using the literature review. Okay, and then from the research question onwards, the conceptual framework is done. As Prof. Nick said, the methodology is there and everything is there. So research gap, between the research gap and the research question, there's some work to be done as well. It's not kind of always straightforward.
Okay, so let me share my screen again. Are you on the big screen or small screen? Big
screen.
Big screen, very well. So who wants some further training on the subject matter? We are offering, Nick and Bastian are offering a workshop on how to identify a research gap. And we will be also running a workshop over in Morocco in a couple of weeks from time, in Marrakesh. Yes, we will combine the necessary with the useful. And we also do have an open club where you can get some live sessions and discuss further what the research gap is, or to help getting to there. And Bastian, I really had to bite my tongue hardly for now over an hour, but you didn't think you'd get away with all of the triggers you were putting to me, or did you?
We'll be enjoying them.
Definitely not, but then we can have another webinar over another 3 hours to solve actually now your provocations. But it's okay, let us do that.
We can be doing that. So we have some running jokes here, Nick, because I'm very bad to my students. I kill their creativity. I don't want them to be imagining anything. They are not supposed to be interested in something. They are not supposed to have passion and ideas. What I want them is to tell me what's the damn problem. And afterwards, we can have ideas. So I also don't accept that a student goes out and read. You know, I have students that just ask me an innocent question, and 4 months later, they come back and said, I collected all of the data. I did 100 interviews. And what have you done? But why? Yeah, well, that's exciting, right?
Because you are not part of his development, Andreas. That's the issue.
They quickly
you did not establish that communication between the supervisory team and the supervisors.
Before they read.
What did I say before?
They are asked to tell me exactly why. Why do you need to read? What is it? Are you just interested in something, or is there a real purpose? Right? Because usually the talks that we then have 2, 3, 5, 6 months later, we could have had 2 days later. So if they know what they want to read, fair enough, go and read. I agree with that. Solving and fixing, right? As soon as you put the words problem and solution in the same sentence, the big blue elephant is in the room, right? The problem is forgotten. The solution, we need the solution. So there's no solution in fixing until the problem is fully understood. And once it's fully understood, you will understand whether or not there's a solution. Perhaps there is no solution to the fact that your boss wants to have a profit margin of 50% and still runs a sustainable business. Yeah? Perhaps you will understand that doesn't go together. But with this, let's move into the discussion where
He
Bastian now can bash back.
he moved that fast. He moved that fast. It's okay. It's understandable.
So let's stop the recording so that I can get my bash back.